here's a good example of the Lane Frost. This is a maquette. And so is that big one right over there, that saddle bronc rider. That's called a maquette sculpture. That's a study for the monuments. Now, those monuments are done at 1 1/4 life size. That's 125% larger. These are a quarter size, life size maquettes. So what I would do is I would enlarge these by 5 times. And when I first started doing it, it was before the computers were around and before they do these foam enlargements now. I used to do them by hand with a metric grid I'd make on a big plywood platform that I'd build, and I'd use a height gauge. And then I would spray urethane foam on them, because if you made them out of solid clay, it would be super heavy. So what I'd do is I'd come in here with an oil filled pipe, because I had a connection there. I got all the free oil pipe I wanted, and I'd make all the pipe in the right proportions and scale it off of my metric grid that I made. And that's what gave me the start of the armature. The armature is the bones of any sculpture. It's all that supports it. So then I would bring in a guy that I met that did spray urethane insulation. And I'd cut out some cardboard templates to help block the spray. And he'd come into my studio and we'd spray these things up. Then I'd carve the foam back to get kind of a rough, good-looking surface going on it. And then I'd put the clay on there. And back then, I used to use at least inch and a half of clay on some spots less, some spots more. But they still ended up weighing a great deal. So that's how I started, and I was doing monuments at the very beginning when there weren't that many people doing monuments, at least not around my part of the country, because there was so much work involved, you had to do them all that way. I didn't know any way better. That's just kind of the way I learned how to do it. But you want to work out your design and your composition small. Like if you look at this piece over here, this is the Wyoming Cowboy. This is a fairly new one. This is the one I did for the University of Wyoming, because Steamboat is the world champion bucking horse, and he was born in Albany County, which is near Laramie, Wyoming. And there's a great story on how he got his name, because he was born in 1900, and he was voted the champion bucking horse. Well, he was voted the worst bucking horse, which meant he was the best, in 1906 and 1907 in Cheyenne Frontier Days. Well, when he was a 3-year-old colt, he was broke to be a ranch horse. And when he was 3 years old, they front-footed him. So they'd put these horses in a corral, they'd front-foot him, and then they'd cut him and make him into geldings. And when they front-footed him, he hit the ground so hard, he broke his nose. And horses have these big, long nasal cavities. And it acted like a reed when it been in. So whenever he'd buck, he'd whistle. And that's how he's got his name, Steamboat. And the cowboys, back in those days, they didn't have bucking chutes. They didn't have double-rig saddles. They rode these guys with single-rig saddles. And they didn't ride him for 8 seconds. They rode him until they quit bucking. And this horse, they said he could buck for a long time. Now I've been on, now they only have him for 8 seconds. And 8 seconds can seem like a long time. But could you imagine riding a bucking horse for 35, 40 seconds? Just bucking as hard as he can. It starts to weaken you. But he wouldn't quit, and that's why those guys really love that horse. In fact, he's supposed to have died. He died when he was 16 years old. He got a wire cut, and it got infected, and they had to put him down. And he's supposed to be buried somewhere on Cheyenne Frontier Days rodeo arena, out on the grounds out there. But if you look at all our license plates, this horse is on all of them. And if you look at our football team, the University of Wyoming has it on there. It's the state symbol, really, for the state of Wyoming. And I was really proud to get it. And that's what I told when I did the dedication, that it was 35 years ago that I saw Harry Jackson's Steamboat, the one that's downstairs of Steamboat. And that's what made me want to be a sculptor. And now I got to do my own Steamboat. So I kind of come a full circle. Well, we can move around some more and see some other pieces.
And if you're interested in the full story on Steamboat, there's actually a book about just Steamboat the horse. And you can check that out in the library and see if it's a book you want to own. But it's a pretty cool story. I don't know too many bucking horses that have books just on them, the horse themselves. But maybe talk a little bit about the Greeley piece, and then we'll move on to the other half of the gallery.
All right, this is called When Champions Meet, and it's a champion cowboy. It's not a specific cowboy. It was just a champion bucking horse and a champion cowboy. But I wanted to make him feel like he's floating out in the air. And when bucking horses first leave the chutes, it's called the mark-out rule. And you have to put your spurs at the base of his neck and his shoulders where they meet. And if you don't, you get a 0. You can have the most beautiful bucking ride you ever rode, and if you didn't mark the horse out, you get a big 0. That's another thing I like better about bull riding. You don't have to mark them out. So I've seen some awesome rides being made, and then the guy gets a 0 for all that work, because your feet have to be in there when the bronc hits his first jump. So if you don't mark the horse out, you get a 0 right off the bat. And what makes this piece kind of unique is I wanted to show all this negative space. And if you look at the big monument, that's a gate is made out of stainless steel, fabricated stainless steel. And I ran stainless steel supports through his hip that run up into his body to help hold all that weight up there. You're talking about a sculpture that weighs 2,000 pounds, so you're going to have a lot of support in there. And then I built some more into the base, but I love that feeling of all that negative space hanging in there. And this is a charcoal drawing I did of that sculpture because they wanted to do it for the rodeo program. So I do some drawings. And this is a real picture of the real steamboat. If you get a chance, come by and see it. And this next piece is another rodeo sculpture I did called All Out. And it's this won a competition for the trophies for the Calgary Stampede. Have any of you guys ever been to Calgary Stampede? It's a great rodeo. It's 10 days long. They get a couple 100,000 people that go through there. And so you win the contract for 5 years for the trophy, and it's coming up to do another one. So I'm going to try to enter some more rodeo pieces. But you win $100,000 and you get this bronze sculpture if you win Calgary Stampede. So if a couple of you big guys back there, you might want to take up some steer wrestling. They call it the big man's event because most of those guys are pretty good size. Because, you know, you think about it, you're jumping off a horse going over 30 miles an hour and grabbing a steer by his horns and trying to put him on his side as quick as you can. This next sculpture I did is called the Cowboy Code. And the museum did a great job, and they put up the kind of the message of the Cowboy Code and all it stands for. And it's a code I live by, really. When I give my word, I don't break it for anybody. And I always try to finish whatever I start. And I tell myself that when I'm working on these big monuments and I don't see anything coming to the end. And if you look at the sculpture, I just put my CN brand on it, and then I put those same sayings that are all incorporated into the base of the sculpture. And the subtle thing is that this cowboy, he's looking down the trail where he's been, because that's the history. And his history is following the cowboy code and being a man that always keeps his word and doing things right. So that's a sculpture that I just kind of thought it would be real appropriate. It's kind of a quiet piece. And then this next piece is a piece it's called Broken Just About Everything But His Word, But My Word. It's because a man's word's his bond. So this guy's he's a rough stock rider, and he's got a broken leg, he's got a broken arm, and he's got a busted nose. If you look, he's got a black eye too, I put in there. And he's got a big scar on his face. And then I wanted to put a little humor in it. So, cowboys, a lot of them put their names on the back of their belts. And this guy's name's Lucky. So I like to put humor in there when I can. And the titles all help that.
Okay, so without touching the sculpture, the way to see that black eye is to hold your hand right here, and you'll get enough light bouncing off your hand to light up under that cowboy hat. Do you see the difference? Without touching it. Let's go over in this corner, because I want to have Chris talk about some of these a little more different subjects that he's done. And for a rough, tough bull rider who does all these rodeo sculptures and the cowboy code and all those things, he sends us a sculpture of a kitty cat, which I think is one of the coolest pieces in the show.
Well, I have cats, and my cats that's my wife. They're our buddies. I've always had dogs, cats, and horses. And my cat, Gray Boy, modeled for this sculpture. And I always thought, I saw a poster of a cat looking in a mirror, and I really got the idea to seeing that poster. And I thought, man, that would make a really cool sculpture. So I started playing around with the idea, and And I thought, well, why don't I put him on a couple of books? And the title of the books are The Power of Belief. And it's something that I really believe about. That's why it's called Dare to Dream Big. You know, why are we limited to a cat? Why don't you think you're a lion? You know, and I like that story. Because I tell you, my first start was, when I first started learning to sculpt, it was all through books, 100%. And it was for a long time, and I'm still a big book reader. In fact, I don't know if I usually listen to books when I'm working. I bet you I listen to at least 60, 65, 70 books a year in my studio while I'm working. And I listen to most completely nonfiction. I like to be inspired. I like to read books that have that spur me on to do something. So I like, there's so many great books out there. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I mean, Between a Rock and a Hard Place. I got dozens of books that I just resonated with, and I'll listen to them once in a while, listen to them again. So that sculpture came about, and I think it would I'd like to do a monument of that, and nobody's commissioned me yet to do one, but I would think that would be great for schools or libraries, and I think I'm just gonna go ahead and do one on my own. Hopefully I'll find somebody that'll want it. And I've done that with a few pieces. It's hard to speculate on a big monument because they're so expensive to do.
Tell them about how you wound up doing this T-Rex.
Yeah, I'm not a dinosaur sculptor by any means, but now I am. So I went to Casper College, and there's a geological museum up there. And this lady, she's 90 years old. Her name's Mary Alice Tobin. And the college called me and said, we have a benefactor that would want to talk to you. Would you come to the school? So I come up there and I meet her. And she's probably about 5'1", and she's 90 years old. And she says, I want you to do a sculpture for the school, and I'm going to pay for it. I said, well, that's great. She says, I want you to do a dinosaur, and I want light to come from within it. I want light to come out of it. I said, really? Wow. I never thought about doing a dinosaur with light coming out of it. But I said, you know, it really challenged me. In fact, I remember I went home that day and I started working on it. I started getting some ideas and thoughts on how to do the sculpture. And if you look, I did the sculpture half skeletal. And then when you look at it the other side, it's all completely fleshed out. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do a dinosaur, I want to do a T-Rex. I mean, those are the baddest cats, the biggest predator that's ever lived. And I thought, well, and if you've ever seen a real skull from a T-Rex, the teeth are unbelievable on them. These teeth are not exaggerated on here. In fact, I got these a little too small, but what I thought was, I put an LED lighting system through this sculpture, so they light it up at night so that light comes out of it, and it gives it kind of a real kind of an eerie look, kind of a spooky feeling. But I was challenged by that, and that's why I don't want to say I'm just a cowboy artist. You know, I do a lot of cowboy work because that's kind of my background, and I love doing cowboy work, but I mean, I don't want to do just bucking horses my whole career. I want to do whatever inspires me. And I've done some other pieces that, you know, you can see if you get one of my books or see some video of my work. I did the monument for Matthew Shepard, and it's not in the show here. It's called The Ring of Peace because it really didn't fit in with the theme they had here. And it's 9 doves flying out of a bell. And Matthew Shepard was the gay Wyoming student that was beat to death in 1998 and left on a fence in Laramie. And his mom's become a friend of mine, and I did this monument for him because she called my wife. And it was right after he died. It was real soon. Wyoming was getting a lot of bad press about the whole thing. And my wife said, Mrs. Shepard called you today. And I said, you mean Matthew Shepard's mom, the boy that died? He goes, yeah. She wants to talk to you about a monument for her son. And I said, really? And I was delivering a monument in Houston. And I was driving back through Texas. And Texas is a big state. It takes you forever to drive out of Texas. So I get about as far as, I'm up in the Panhandle. I stop in Dumas, Texas. And there's a motel there. And I pull over. It's like 11:30 at night. And I go to bed. And I always have a pencil and paper near my bed so I can take notes or draw or do something if I come up with an idea. And I woke up about 4 in the morning and I sketched that sculpture. And I wrote that poem that goes with it. And then I fell back to sleep. And I remember I woke up the next morning and I didn't remember it until I saw that drawing. And I said, wow, I got to do that piece. That piece is called The Ring of Peace. And it's, you know, it was the first piece I did that was so different from anything that I'd ever tried before. And I don't know where it came from, but I knew it came to me strong enough that I wanted to do it. I wish more of those sculptures would come to me in dreams. It's been pretty rare, but that one did.
Chris, there's several pieces around the room that have either elements like the lightning here or the bucking horse that's more of a relief version of the Wyoming symbol, train, and a couple others over here. What are you trying to accomplish with the wall hanging pieces and the relief pieces versus working in a full 3 dimensions?
Well, you know, I'm always trying to challenge myself to do something a little different. So I hadn't done any reliefs, and I started doing some just to challenge myself to make something a unique relief, because you don't see that many bronze reliefs, and painters don't like you to do them because then you take up the wall space. But this piece, I wanted to tell a story. So this is called, and I use my titles to help tell the stories a lot. This one's called Lightning in the Sky, Thunder in the Rain. And what it is, it's this cowboy, and he's riding, this is like a young 3-year-old. He's just starting to break him. He's riding him with a break and hackamore. You know, guys that are cowboys will probably notice some of the more intricate things in here, like he's just starting this horse. It's a young horse, hasn't been rode much. And he's just starting to rein, and he's starting to put his slicker on. And just as he hasn't got his slicker quite buttoned all the way, the lightning bolt strikes real close to him, and it spooks the horse and starts him to buck. And that's why it's called lightning in the sky, but thunder in the rain, not the rain, but in this rain. So it's just a play on kind of words and make a little interesting story. I liked it, my titles, to enhance the sculptures and tell the story, because there's a lot of sculptures in here. I got the title before I ever got the sculpture. And then I made the sculpture around the title. Like, if you want to see a rainbow, you got to stand a little rain. That's one over there. I hadn't ever seen anybody sculpt a rainbow. And I thought, wow, that'd be a challenge. And I had the hardest time. I bet you I made about 20 rainbows before I come up with that one, because I was just trying to get the right arc in it and size. And the rider is really small, and the environment's so much bigger, but it really kind of reads better that way, that piece. And that piece has got a lot of color in it just because of that rainbow. So I don't know. I like that one because it's got a unique feel to it, but it's got a story in it too. If you want to see some good times, you got to go through some bad. Life's not all a merry-go-round, and it shouldn't be.
And maybe we'll talk just a touch of business here. You know, some of these relief pieces obviously don't have the mass of bronze in them, so it's not as expensive to cast, and it